Well,
Kenneth,
I'll take on the question. I think that's a really good point from Mary Ellen about the responsibility of people who imagine, design, and then instrumentalize these sorts of systems, not just in defense, but in other areas of human activity as well, having a degree of moral responsibility for what they go on to do. And in the end, given the point that's been made about the scale and speed of autonomous decision-making and a lot of its military utility deriving from those two factors, it may be the case that that's where the bulk of moral responsibility has to lie. We've moved from talking about humans in the loop when I started thinking about these issues to on the loop. It's not sustainable in a world where we've imagined replicator and similar mass scale systems like that for the human to remain even on the loop. We're moving to a world where the human is before the loop, and it's imperative that we design systems that can capture and understand our intention before the action starts.
Thanks a lot. Christian, I hand over back to you.
Thank you, Alex. I'm really interested on touch upon the risk of conflict escalation. And this is something that we link a lot with the autonomous weapon systems. And Patricia, you already touched upon this risk of conflict escalation, but how the employment of autonomous weapon systems could lower the threshold of military confrontation, how the military will download that, but also if it's the case, which is the ways to address that? Because we are looking for solutions also. Thank you.
So, I mean, one of the difficulties we've got is in the issue of predictability, because predictability is actually difficult even without these very complex systems. I mean, when we, for example, set off a ballistic missile, the predictability of where it will fall is probabilistic. And we're increasingly moving into a world where the calculations on which we depend will be probabilistic, particularly with artificial intelligence, complex systems, systems within systems, and also as we move into quantum technologies. It's not just about quantum computing, it's also about quantum communications, etc. So we have to get used to this concept of probability much better than we do in our decision making. And with that, a very high degree of uncertainty. So we have to, when we try to develop an international legal framework or an international legal agreement, we have to start looking at how to address this. And I've been thinking about what we could look at, and it's things like, we could definitely test for bias, and we can address bias. There's lots of different ways. And one of the first things you have to understand is there's no bias-free system, right? And that includes the human brain, right? So human control will include a set of biased brains. That's part of our problem. And the machines will be biased as well. So let's try and get to grips with the bias. I think the other thing is to think about outcome-based restraints. How do we base the restraints of what we're trying to do on outcomes rather than on what's behind things? And that seems to me like a better thing. And then the other is to explore something that's worked with the nuclear and the bio, not as well as we might hope, perhaps, or at least, I do hope. And that's on the taboo of use and the taboo of certain outcomes. And this leads into, I think, this sense of humanity. This leads into this really deep-rooted sense of ethics and our collective humanity as a species. And so this is where I would go. And I would like to just add, because I love to riff off people, but I think Mary Ellen's really got a point. We've got to look at the UN Charter again. We've got to look at how we prevent war in much wider context. I used to think that people who talked about this were delusioned. I have to say that. I thought it was a nice idea, but I have increasingly begun to understand that they have really got onto something, and there are ways in which we can do it. It's a direction of travel. Sorry. It's really difficult to enforce. But if we don't go down that pathway, we're going down another one.
Thank you, Patricia, for your reflections. Yes, please.
If I could just jump in on Patricia's last comment, because she and I have been talking about this theory of deterrence, which is the underlying idea of security for NATO. And it's just not very, it's wobbly at best, whereas these ancient norms that certainly the drafters of the UN Charter coming through the Second World War completely believed would end armed conflict. That has the test of time, that has strength, and we should not have let them go and I'm talking about the major military states. Look at the rest of the world that don't have these militaries. Look at Costa Rica, promoting, not finding it delusional at all to make commitments. And just one last thing, a lot of the work can be done in technology itself. We can neutralize a lot of the offensive capabilities. We're already doing this in cyber. This crazy idea that we could create something called a cyber weapon has come home to haunt us with so many cyber problems that now we're finally looking at cyber defense, security, and not messing around with it and making it unusable for everyone. That can happen with autonomous weapons as well.
Thank you very much. And as always...
May I just hop in on that one? I'm really sorry to abuse. Deterrence is certainly problematic and inherently uncertain, and we've come close, and I consider myself very lucky to be here. But I rather put my faith in deterrence than in the Kellogg-Briand Pact that attempted to outlaw war in the 1920s. I'm not sure that deterrence extends very well into the world of artificial intelligence, but perhaps that's one we can discuss in due course.
Thank you. And as always, the problem when you have a very interesting panel, the enemy is the time. And I'm so sorry to put a little bit of pressure on you. But first of all, I want to react on hope. Hope is what we need, and to keep a link to the UN Charter. And probably it's time to Article 26, no, Alex, on the UN. We used to work on that a long time ago. And now I want to move to Thompson. Would you like to add to this a key dimension of unknowns, or any norm setting is always informants and compliance? And some critics say that this is an unsurmountable challenge when it comes to autonomous weapon systems. And I want to ask you the question, how could one ensure that new rules on autonomous weapon systems can take into account future technological developments? How can a combination of rules, transparency, verification, and monitoring address the challenges of compliance or the challenge of proliferation?